Welcome to Sober Solutions. We are a weekly recovery podcast not affiliated with any particular 12-step or recovery program. However, you may hear us mention them. My name is Jason, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Chris, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Ben. I'm an alcoholic and addict.
And welcome back to Sober Solutions. Tonight is episode 8. This is a two-part series. We're going to be talking about getting into treatment. And we're very excited for our guest tonight, Dan O. We actually met Dan while we were in rehab together. We're very excited to have him on the show. Good to see you, Dan.
Good to be here, guys. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, sure. So the whole program was honestly a huge surprise to me, right? For our listeners, I'm actually 20 years old. I got into treatment when I was 19. So I can't technically have a legal drink. I'm an alcoholic who can't have a legal drink, which is always cool. So I started drinking, honestly, early on, probably around 13, 14 years old, but it was never anything that kind of took off immediately. Sometimes you'll hear people who will have their first drink and they knew right away. That wasn't the case with me, right? The case with me was more, it was a gradual response to dealing with emotions. Around 14, I got into a pretty prestigious high school, so a lot of pressure was put on me from the get-go, right? But with that, I was ready for it. I felt like I was up to the responsibilities that were to be had and the academic rigor that was going to ensue from that. But I may have spoken too soon because gradually as time moved on, I started finding myself going more and more to things that weren't what I had previously done. So then around 16 or 17, I started drinking to deal with my emotions. That was the first time I discovered that alcohol could actually numb and mute a lot of the things that I was feeling and make myself more available to the people around me, right? Make myself feel more confident. I was able to do more things because at night I could just fall into oblivion. I could fall asleep happily, no anxiety, no depression, nothing like that. So I was a functioning alcoholic for a while. And that continued, once I got my license, I was able to have a means of getting it, right? Because I was able to go to and from the liquor store. I was able to keep the alcohol in my car. And nobody ever saw an issue with me. I never had any problems regarding my particular drinking because I never went out of hand. I never wanted anyone to know what I was doing because that would mean I had to stop. As a good alcoholic, that's what I do. So as time progressed, it just got worse and worse. I started to slowly go off kilter when it came to different aspects of my life, whether that was grades, relationships, jobs. It didn't really matter. Kind of everything began to be a means towards alcohol. That was the only reason why I was continuing to do the things that I was doing. And I think it's important to mention that growing up, I actually had a great relationship with God. I went to a Catholic school all through grade school. Once I got to high school, I learned the Bible in Latin. Like, I'm talking hardcore Catholic. That's what I was from day one. But I found myself continuously questioning my religion, right? Like, I always kind of wondered if this was the path that I was designed to take. And the more I questioned it and the more alcohol that was involved, the more I became, the struggling agnostic, as our program says, right? We agnostics. I found myself becoming more categorized by that. And from there, my image of God became very distasteful, a lot of disdain toward God. Why would you give me this? Why would this happen to me if there was a God who was all loving? What's the point of all of that? So my image of God was very skewed as my drinking progressed. However, that ultimately ended to the point where I didn't have a view of God at all, right? The term God to me became like poison, and I wanted to recoil from it, and I didn't want anything to do with it. So moving along, when I finally got to college, I was able to get into a pretty good college because of my, abilities academically, and I was able to get some money from college. But what's supposed to be this joyous and fun occasion, choosing a college because I had a lot of options, wasn't for me. I essentially kind of just picked one and went with it, right? That was the ultimate goal of mine because I didn't want my parents to spend any money on me. Because I had this belief that I had a timetable or what's the word? One of those sand clock or something like that, right? And my time was to run out at age 25. that was my full belief, true belief. I had that ingrained in my head since I was 16 years old. And I had come to make everyone around me believe that I was suffering from things I wasn't suffering from, this depression, anxiety, and I myself believed it. That's why I was so good at it. But people always say when you mix fire with fire, it doesn't put it out. If you mix depression with a depressant, it's not exactly going to get rid of it. And that's what I was doing, right? That's what I continued to do over and over again, meeting kind of the criteria for insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But once I got to college, I thought this was going to be my new start. This was going to be my opportunity to reinvent myself. I was going to be able to possibly stop drinking, just focus on myself, focus on grades, focus on school, focus on girls. I mean, kind of anything else besides drinking. But independence at the time wasn't exactly something that was great for me, because now, instead of trying to hide my drinking, I didn't have to. It was just a part of the atmosphere and the life that I had been thrown into. So if my drinking was bad in high school, it propelled tremendously by the time I got to college. I was drinking every single day, continuously throughout the day. When I wasn't drinking, I started to get the DTs, right? I started to get the shakes in the morning. I started to get, that agitation, that fogginess. And the only time I felt clear was when I was drinking. It was something that I can honestly say I don't understand how my maintained drinking still propelled me to get good grades. Still, my social life was great. My family life was great. Everything in my life still seemed good at the time. And then finally, towards the end of my freshman year in college, the whole pandemic started. So for me to get sent home right away, that was okay. It's not a big deal. All I know is my home environment. I know a couple of things there. I know the liquor stores that'll sell to me. Again, I'm 19 years old. I knew I was comfortable, right? And I was actually happy to get home because I didn't have to constantly put on a show for the people around me in my dorm. But what that did allow me to do was isolate a lot more. And as we've come to know in the program, isolation can be one hell of a thing, man. You get in your head, you start thinking about all the things that you've done wrong, that you're continuing to do wrong, how you want to change. And that causes you to drink. Continually kind of sitting in your shit will cause you to drink. So when that started happening to me, right, that was like the fuse that someone lit and the bomb went off. My drinking propelled. If it was bad before, it was completely unmanageable at this point. I drank continuously from the beginning of March until about halfway through August. And I really don't remember a whole lot of that time, which is unfortunate because I had the opportunity to spend time with my family. I was able to, accomplish these great things at home, actually build a relationship. And instead I just drank. I missed all of that. Some people say it's a blessing because I missed off quarantine. I tend to agree with them. Like if this is going to happen, this wasn't the worst time. But I also view it as a blessing because had this not happened, I could have kept drinking for years. I could have been out there for another 10, 12 years without knowing that this is a disease and the problems that ensue. So it got to the point where in mid-August, I had attempted to take my own life because I couldn't take the drinking anymore. I couldn't take this continuous pattern of destruction that was overcoming me. And of course, I didn't end up dying. I ended up going to Seabrook in South Jersey, where I met the wonderful people on this podcast. And from there, I kind of just jumped right into the work, right? It was from there where I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was actually introduced to the fact that other people suffer from the disease I suffer from. I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. And this was the first experience I truly had with God, because I sat in a room and I remember there was an old timer at the facility. You guys remember Gary? First time I ever got breakfast at this place, right? I'm shaking, I'm going through DTs, I'm shitting my pants, I'm throwing up everything you can imagine. And I see Gary, this quiet little old guy, couldn't be more than 90 pounds. He's sitting at the table all alone and, it's early, I didn't sleep at all. So I go over and I sit next to him. I start talking with him. He's this quiet, gentle guy, but the stories he would tell were unbelievable. This guy lived 50 lives. And having that first initial contact with somebody who suffered from my same disease was what sparked me to continue to, have hope. And that's what I didn't have for so long. I didn't have any hope. But also there was the introduction of the God theory and the fact that, you know, I can believe in a God that works for me, right? It doesn't have to be any preconceived notion of what God is for any religion. It's just the idea that the God that works for me might not work for the guy sitting across from me. But if he works for me, I'm going to continue to pray to him and the power that's greater than myself. And then from there, I'll be able to put faith in something that's bigger than me. And by doing that, that stress, because I couldn't stop drinking on my own. But my original God was really Alcoholics Anonymous, GOD, group of drunks. Like that was my God. And then from there, I started to learn and develop relationships. And it's just been an incredible journey and a life-changing journey. And I wouldn't have it any other way. They say life beyond your wildest dreams, and I'm living that. Like, this is incredible. So I didn't know if you wanted to get into my sobriety at all, but that's my story.
Awesome story, Dan. Awesome story. It's really great to hear you. You sound so much better from the time that I met you. And one thing that I know about you now, what you're doing now, is that you're an admissions director for rehab. Can you tell us a little bit about what that job is, what you do, and how you help people that are coming into recovery?
Yeah, sure. So I actually work as an admissions director for facilities all over the country. What I am is I'm kind of a medium to introduce people who might not know about recovery to different options they have available for them, right? And in this field, I get calls from people of all different walks of life, right? You have the homeless guy on the side of Kensington, and then you have the rich guy in the mansion in Kentucky, and both people are still struggling from the same thing. So what I'm actually able to do is provide them with different options that fit, their financial current situation, their family life, their location, whatever it may be. I'm able to kind of figure that out and then find locations that work best for them. What I usually do, right, is if I'm meeting a client for the first time, I'll try to get their story and then speak with the parents, the brothers, the fiancés, people like that, because then I'll get all different angles of the story and kind of really get a bigger picture idea of what's going on. And then from there, I'm able to document everything and reach out to different facilities and get in contact with them so a possible admission may happen. Ideally, I want to admit as many people as possible. But as we know, treatment centers can be a little stingy when it comes to money. So I do my best to keep the prices absolutely as accessible for everyone as possible. Also, if somebody doesn't have insurance or doesn't have any money, I still want to make sure that they have options for recovery, right? Because everybody should be entitled to get recovery. And if, there's a bunch of different factors that go into it, whether that be mental health, whether that be serious family issues, domestic abuse, things like that. All of these things play a factor into my decision on where I'm going to recommend they go. And then the second part is just getting them there. Right? Because I don't think I've come across someone yet who hasn't put up at least a little bit of a fight to get into treatment. But then, 30 days later, I get the call, oh my God, you saved my life. Oh, yeah. Like, yeah, I'll take the apology later. It's okay.
I bet. I know I was like that, kicking and screaming on my way in, if not outwardly, internally. And then really loving life as I was walking out because I was alive. I wasn't dead inside anymore, and I was walking out into this new opportunity to live a new life, which has grown exponentially since seeing you in Seabrook. Tell us a little bit more about the interactions that you have. Not breaking anyone's anonymity or identifying anyone specifically, but what are those interactions like? Are they with the client? Are people calling in for the client? How does that work? What does that sound like?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, I'm glad you mentioned like the anonymity of the whole thing, right? Because that's a huge part of building confidence in the people who call. So a lot of times you'll actually see the individual call themselves, right? And that'll be like the morning after a drunken night or a bender or something like that. They'll get that clarity and that gift of desperation. And from there, I'm able to work with them, right? Because they're going to be open and honest. They're going to talk to me. They're going to tell me what's going on. They're not going to hesitate when I make recommendations. They're going to say whatever it takes, I'm willing to do. And those are the ideal clients because those are the people who are ready. Like, they have gone through this enough times. They've been to treatment enough times. They're finally ready to actually get this recovery going. The other times I'll usually get calls from, like I said before, like the fiancés, the boyfriends, the girlfriends, the kids, a lot of times parents, because I don't know if you guys know how insurance works, but if an individual is under 26 years old and the parents have insurance, then they're able to go under their parents' insurance. The second they turn 27, that's cut off. So parents will know this and they'll recognize this and they'll say, this is the perfect time to get them treatment. This is the perfect time to get them help. And then when I get the kid on the phone, he doesn't want anything to do with it. I'm just smoking weed. I'm just doing this. Yeah, okay. Like, I know, you don't want to tell me anything. I understand. But the second that I identify myself as a recovering addict alcoholic, they're open to me. They're able to talk to me. They're able to feel like somebody gets them and understands them, which a lot of times you won't see when it comes to treatment. If you talk to somebody, for example, who isn't in recovery, and they're trying to understand you, they're trying to break you down, it's a lot more difficult because you don't feel that they're going to have the same experience and the same advice that someone in recovery would have. So once I mentioned that, whether that be to the parents who aren't struggling or have nothing going on, or the people who are, that's where I see the most trust occur. So definitely I would say the individuals call the most, but you do get a lot of calls from the parents and from the other people who are just worried about whoever's trying to go to treatment.
I remember the first time I went to treatment, my wife actually called a bunch of recruiters. I know you're not necessarily a recruiter. This is when I really had no knowledge about rehab, and we didn't either, which they did educate us. But what are the different, I guess, how is it different when you talk to the parents? So when a parent or loved one or aunt or uncle, whoever, not the individual, is calling, how does that conversation differentiate from actually talking to the person that's struggling?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times when I'm talking to the parents of an individual, or like you said, your wife, like if I was talking to her, I would approach this to try and initially calm the person down. Because when they get on the phone, there's that initial super worried, they're going to die. There's all these things happening. I read about this online. I think the worst invention of all time was online, because, you hear all these horror stories and immediately you think all of those things are going to happen to your loved one. So when it comes to people calling for someone else, the first thing that I do is I try to calm them down. I try to explain the situation, and I try to make sure that they know that I'm going to do everything I can to help the person, their loved one. So that's kind of the way that I approach that. And then gradually, as things move on, not a lot can be done with the loved one other than just the name, the number, the date of birth, like information wise. But in order to really get someone into treatment, I need to speak to the individual directly. I need to be able to kind of break them down, understand what's really been going on, because as addicts and alcoholics, we understand that a lot of times we're not going to tell people what's really going on. No one's really going to see the full picture of our run. It's us who has to look in the mirror and know that. So when I talk to somebody who isn't the loved one, who's the person calling on behalf of themselves, I'm a lot more upfront with them, right? Like, I tell them immediately, hey, I'm actually in recovery as well. I know what you're going through, and I want to do everything I can to help you today. Now, if I see, no one's ever going to tell the real amount of what they're using or drinking. So after the first say, I'll say, like, okay, is that really how much you're drinking? And you won't believe how many times I'll be like, well, actually, it's not really how much I'm doing way more. And then they'll drop 5 different drugs. So I'm like, okay, now we're talking. Now we're actually finding out what's going on. But when it comes to those people, I'm a lot more personal, right? I'm a lot more personable. I try to make them feel as comfortable as possible, because I understand where they're at and I understand how vulnerable they are at this moment. And I don't want them to get scared, and I don't want them to think that they're crazy or that the world's against them or anything like that. My goal is just to ensure them that I can get them somewhere safe and I can get them treatment. So that's kind of the difference between the two. But again, I definitely see the importance of both kind of directions going into a call. Because if somebody gets on the phone and they're super angry right away because, their husband was on another bender and they don't understand, my job is to say, hey, this happens. This isn't uncommon. Let me do everything I can to help your husband.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, because until someone surrenders or they have some sort of external reason or even a consequence, I mean, there's there's only so much you can do with the parents or somebody else. I mean, it's really up to that individual, whether he or she is forced to or chooses to. You know, all of us, I'm sure our parents and loved ones have said, hey, you need to get help, and we just like brushed it off. But it's really up to us, or some people are forced to get into. So that's a good point. You can't really do much with the parents, and that's good to know. I mean, that's kind of calming in a sense. It stinks when you're in that state, but if you can realize that there's not that much you can do other than separate yourself from that situation, that's the best thing that you can do sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you said, it's about the willingness, because if they don't have the willingness, nothing's going to get done. Nobody can walk into treatment for the person, right? And you said like forced and things like that. That happens. But our goal is sobriety. At the end of the day, we want to see these people get better. We don't want to see them get in because they have to. We want to see them get in because it's possible for them to get help. And we want them to know that. And we want them to finally come to the realization that there are better ways to live than continuing this, destructive path that they're on. So yeah, when it does come to the loved ones, and especially the friends, there's not a whole lot I can do there without speaking to the people directly.
Dan, it is so good I'm just kind of marveling listening to you, because I remember you coming into rehab and seeing you so mature. Like, you're 20 and you feel more mature. You seem more mature than I feel. And so, I want to know, first, what got you into rehab in the first place?
So honestly, it came down to, I was ready. I had the willingness. I had drank plenty. I drank my fair share. But I genuinely couldn't accept the fact that this was the way it had to be. So I denied it for so long. And I would even go to an AA meeting here or there and then leave because there was people with 30 years of sobriety and say, that's never going to happen, and immediately start drinking again. So that's it was one event in particular, my attempt, that put me in rehab, but there was so much leading up to it, those slip ups that we see. And of course, I was 19 years old, so I didn't exactly have, the wife, the kids. I didn't really have a whole lot of responsibilities at home other than just getting better. So it was really kind of perfect timing. God has no coincidences, but what ultimately got me into treatment was my parents, right? And them just being upfront with me and saying, like, we don't recognize you anymore. We don't know who you are anymore. And once I heard that, I was ready. I mean, I didn't want to continue to be this person anymore. So that jump, that leap of faith, changed my life, and it saved my life, because had I kept doing what I was doing, I would not be here. So definitely, when I bring that experience with me, when I'm talking to people on the phone and I remember where I was at, I think it definitely helps me, kind of persevere through the tough clients, through the tough individuals, and say, hey, I was where you're at. I want to see you get better. I got to wait for you to get better. Let's do it.
That's awesome. One of the things you mentioned there, again, is that you're 20 years old. And again, something that I marveled at in rehab, you were 19. It kind of blew my mind. And so what is it like, even in the pandemic, but what is it like for you as a 20-year-old to be in recovery? And it sounds like you've come to this realization for yourself that this is how it's going to be, as long as you want to maintain a sober and healthy life. So what is that like as a 20-year-old, not kid, but, person?
So I can tell you actually a funny story. On my 20th birthday, I was chairing an AA meeting. I don't know how many guys can say that, but
that's great.
That's amazing.
It's crazy. And when I just got out of Seabrook, the first thing they said is hit a meeting and get a sponsor. I was like, all right, shit, I'm on my own. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and do this. So I get out of Seabrook, I get home, I immediately hit a meeting and I raised my hand and, I said, hey, I'm new to this. I don't really know how to do this, but I need a temporary sponsor. Is there anything you guys can do for me? So after the meeting, this guy comes up to me and he says, look, I don't do that temporary sponsor shit. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Right. I'm going to tell you where I'm at, and I'm going to tell you to come to a commitment. Right. So he asks me 3 questions, essentially along the lines of like, how willing am I to do this? And I said, I'm whatever it takes. I don't care what it takes. I'll do it. I'm committed. I'm home. I don't care. I want to stay sober. He said, okay. He said, show up to a coffee commitment in the middle of some guy's garage an hour away at 5:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. I was like, all right, I guess this is what we're doing. So 5 a.m. Saturday morning, I get in my car, I drive to this guy's house. And when I walk in, the first thing he says is, holy shit, you showed up. Had no expectations showing up. And he says, you know, I asked a bunch of guys to come to this, and half of them didn't. Half of them went one time, and that's it. I come to find out later, my now sponsor got sober at 20 years old. As crazy as that sounds, he got sober at 20, and he just celebrated his 28th year of sobriety, which for me, like, that was no coincidence that happened. He wasn't even supposed to be at that meeting, and he was. But, you know, obviously there's a lot of trial and error going into this thing so young. I made the decision to go back to school, which ultimately was dumb. So I moved back into school on January 28th, and I lasted a total of 3 weeks before kind of that FOMO, that fear of missing out, that just overwhelmed me. And I was on the phone with Chris a lot during that time, actually. We would always check in. We'd talk to one another. I heard a lot about Ben's golf game, which was good. But yeah, like, plugging in was definitely hard, because a lot of times in the rooms, you'll see guys who are older, right? And they have responsibilities. They're married, they have kids. And it's hard to connect with them. As hard as I tried, and I consider myself a pretty personable guy, it is still hard, right? Because I still want, you know, those friends who are younger. I want those 20-year-old guys I can say, let's go play basketball, let's go do something, let's, you know, hang out, watch a basketball game or whatever it is. It's still hard to do that, right? Because not a lot of people get this thing and are committed to this thing so young. I think it's like under 1% stay sober the first time under 20. But recently, in the last few months, and actually how I ended up getting my job, I began working with this networking in a town nearby me, and a lot of the people who were there were young. So the first couple of times I went, I was like, you know, wow, this guy's like 22, 24, 28, like younger guys. And I said, after one meeting, I just went up and I was like, you know, you guys got this thing so young, like whatever. They're like, all right, yo, come play basketball with us. And they immediately threw me into the group, no hesitation. And from there, this kind of sparked this whole network where now we have guys in California. I'm going out to California next month. We have guys all over the country. And at any time of the day, I can call one of these guys and they'll answer and they'll say, I got an answer. If I don't have an answer, I'll give you someone's number who does. So that, for me, affirmed that I made the right call. Right? I wasn't a loner anymore. I had my network, and I finally was able to really start to grow without this fear that was overwhelming me for the first 120 days of my sobriety.
That's awesome, Dan. And I think that community, that sense of fellowship, regardless of the program that you're in, because our listeners are part of many different types of programs of recovery, that fellowship is so key and essential. At least it is for my program, you know, and I hear that it's really a part of yours as well. So, you know, we really like to focus on those in early recovery. So, being someone in early recovery, with that hat of being someone who helps people get into early recovery, what's one piece of advice you would give our listeners as they travel down this road of recovery?
So the first time I ever actually sat in a few meetings without my sponsor in my first 90 days of recovery, every time I shared, the old timers would say, you know, shut up and listen. Like, until you got 90 days, shut up and listen. And I was like, how was this guy telling me to shut up and listen? I'm telling him to shut up. But I actually did. I shut up and listened. And there was not really a resentment after I really started to listen. Because I realized after the first few meetings of me not sharing and just listening to what everybody else had to say, I don't really know anything about this program. I don't really know anything about life. And these guys do. These guys have lived it and they've experienced it. Now, of course, obviously, if I had an urge to drink or something, I would share. And, that's a lot different than just sharing on what you know about the book. But when I sat down and really listened to what these men were saying and actually took what they were saying into consideration, I used to bring a notebook, and every time I heard a really good line, I'd write it down. And I would go back and I'd read through them after the meeting, like all of them. I'd say, these guys actually know what they're talking about. Like, this has been practiced, right? This isn't off the cuff. They've had this ready. So my advice to someone who's coming on into early sobriety, just listen and be open-minded. These people want to help you. They don't want to hurt you. No one's out to get you in this program. And by you putting out your hand and asking for help, it benefits every other person in the room sobriety. That was a really hard concept for me to understand, because my sponsor used to always say, "You're helping me more than I can ever help you." I was like, "Dude, you're saving my life here. Like, what are you talking about?" And he said to me one time, he's like, "You're going to understand later on." And so when I started working with people and hearing from the parents and hearing from, the people who are struggling, I saw that both sides of the spectrum. I saw the people who were suffering, dying. People get on the phone, and next time you call them, they're dead. And then I also saw the recovery side, where the people that I was sending to treatment are calling me and saying, "Dude, I got 30 days sober. I got 60 days sober. Like, this is amazing. This is the best thing ever." And after seeing that and being able to help other people who have the same thing that I have, that was the biggest contributor to my recovery. That, and watching that it's possible, those things, you can't replace. There's no medicine for this disease, unfortunately. There's something better than medicine, and you don't have to pay for it. But yeah, my advice would be listen, be open-minded, get a network, huge, get a network right away, get a sponsor, and don't think this defines you, right? Alcoholism isn't who you are. It's something you have. That's all it is. It's something that you have.
Danny, before we wrap up here, I just got to say, I've admired you since rehab, since, you demolished Chris on the basketball court because he's old. But no, sorry. But, I have just watching you grow has been one of the, and we haven't been in, tremendous contact in the last couple of months, but looking at where you were and looking at where you are now is really one of the inspirations for me. And it's funny, you're one of the people that reminds me of me, because I'm always told in the rooms that I'm the enthusiastic one. Well, seeing your enthusiasm is infectious, and there's just so much of your story that I relate to, and the ways that we're alike, so much so that sometimes, medical facilities switch up medications when they shouldn't. But that's another podcast. But I just I want to keep encouraging you to keep on doing the good work, and keep taking care of yourself, and stay strong in your recovery, and just all the best, brother.
I really appreciate that.
Absolutely, Dan. I know Chris and I echo that, and it's been a real pleasure getting to see you and having you on the show. I think that you brought some great advice for our listeners, and like Ben said, it is really good to see how well you're doing. Have a good night, man.
Thank you, guys. I love you guys.
It was so great seeing Dan, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing how young he is and how long it took us to get to that point, honestly.
Oh, I know.
Right?
Absolutely.
And imagine how much, I know it's pointless to do this, but imagine where we would be if we found that knowledge, when we were 20 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I wasn't ready at 20. I didn't know I was ready. I was ready at 36. But, it's, like seeing his enthusiasm it's a great thing to see that call it pink cloud, call it whatever you want. It's somebody who gets it and is, living it every single day. And that's all you can ask, for a fellow, member of
I
this
like
fellowship.
how he's also being very fluid with his recovery. So, he was going to go to law school. He was in a very good school in New York. And, through this process, he found something that he loved. He's helping people get into treatment and he's adjusting his life accordingly. And with that, it's helping him stay sober. So I praise him for that. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a great thing to see. When I found recovery, and as I went through it, it was not easy at the beginning. Making decisions wasn't easy at the beginning. Was I doing the right thing? And eventually, just a little bit more clear, level-headed thought comes about, and those you can weigh those things. You can weigh putting school on the back burner, or lowering their temperature, if you will, so that you can pursue something. And to see him get into this has been a great thing to see.
Yeah, and he's doing such great work too. Chris, you mentioned it. This is in a way helping him stay sober, and he's helping so many people across the country. And hearing him have stories of people that come back 30, 60, 90 days later that are thanking him for saving his life, it's just absolutely wonderful. Awesome. Well, boys, it was a great episode tonight. And as always, tonight's episode is dedicated to the still sick and suffering alcoholic and addict, especially the individual who will pick up for the first time tonight. Have a great night, boys.
Have a
Have a
great
good night.
We appreciate your liking and subscribing to our podcast. If you liked what you heard today and would like to support our podcast, feel free to Venmo $1 to our virtual basket at Sober Solutions Podcast. We want to hear from you too. If you have a comment, question, topic, or would like to come on the show, find us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Sober Solutions Podcast. Or you can shoot us an email to sobersolutionspodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Apple Podcast and Spotify. And if you like what you've heard, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show.